Hello and thanks for joining us for today's video. We'll be talking about 3 cases of men who confessed to shocking things just before they were executed. We just want to tell you in the next few weeks we're going to have a major announcement, so keep checking out the channel every so often so you don't miss it. We'll also be making the announcement on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, so please follow us if you don't already. We're also hoping that you've been checking out our podcast, Into the Killing. In our latest episode, we talk about 2 cases that were solved using a unique tool called the MVAC system. The MVAC system was designed for a much different purpose, but turned out to be an incredible crime-fighting tool. You can find Into the Killing on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you find great podcasts. Just before we get started, we want to bring you a word from our amazing sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. Before, I always hated doing things like waiting for the bus or waiting for my partner to try and close. But thanks to Raid Shadow Legends, I love those few minutes of downtime. Raid Shadow Legends is one of the best RPGs available. Today, I want to talk about one of my favorite parts of the game, the Doom Tower. The Doom Tower is essentially a giant prison with a dark backstory. Just after the Arbiter was created, she fought off hordes of monsters created by Sarath. But the Arbiter is no god, so she couldn't kill them all. Instead, she created the Doom Tower to imprison these horrifying creatures. For a while, the prison worked, but Sarath is leaking back into the world, and the Doom Tower isn't as strong as it once was. The Arbiter needs players like you to venture into the Doom Tower and hopefully do what she couldn't, put these bosses down for good. The Doom Tower is just one great aspect of the game. They have over 600 champions, and one of my favorites is Hellgazer, because she looks awesome and she's so powerful. Just watch her as she wipes out these enemies. I also love taking on dungeon bosses. There are specific ways to make sure you defeat each boss. Like with the Ice Golem, you don't want to waste time killing his allies because he can respawn them. This month, Raid has a non-stop schedule of special events and activities. I'm really looking forward to the jam-packed Halloween lineup at the end of the month. There will be huge rewards and tournaments against other players, special fragment events to get some new legendary champions, including one spooky Halloween champion, and much more. Raid's never been bigger, busier, or better, and very soon a giant update is coming, so now is the time to get into the game. If you want to get a huge head start in Raid, all you have to do is hit the link in the description or scan my QR code. You'll get an epic hero, Chonaru, who is amazing in the Doom Tower, 200,000 silver, 1 experience point boost, 1 energy refill, and 1 ancient shard, so you can summon an awesome champion as soon as you get in. All this treasure will be waiting for you here. Once you're in, you can find me in the game under the name C-Listed, and if you're fast, you can join my clan. And it's that easy. Just click on the link and I'll see you in the game. Number 3. Billy Frank Vickers. In the spring of 1983, the Arthur City Superette was a small grocery store and gas station in Arthur City, Texas. It was owned by 50-year-old Philip Kinslow. On the night of March 12, 1993, Kinslow closed his business for the evening and drove to his rural home. He stopped at the gate at the edge of his property. Suddenly, gunshots rang out. Kinslow was armed with a .38 caliber pistol and he fired several shots. He then got back into his car and drove towards his house. But he crashed into a tree. His wife heard the gunshots and saw him drive into the tree. 911 was called and 50-year-old Philip Kinslow was rushed to the hospital. But sadly, he died shortly after arriving. He had been shot once in the chest and twice in the right arm. The area where the shooting happened was searched, and the police found a plastic grocery bag, a roll of duct tape, and a ski mask with some strands of hair inside of it. The next day, about 2 miles from the crime scene, officers came across a man who was walking with a tree branch as a makeshift crutch. He was 47-year-old Billy Frank Vickers, who went by the nickname Sonny. Vickers was a car salesman with a lengthy criminal record. He was first arrested 26 years earlier for burglary. He had been sentenced to 2.5 years of prison. In December 1980, Vickers was arrested on 2 counts of felony possession of a firearm. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. He served less than 4. In October 1988, Vickers and several other men were arrested for being in possession of over 5 pounds of marijuana. In November 1988, Vickers was arrested for theft over $750. In April 1990, he was arrested for setting a restaurant on fire twice, once in July 1984 and again in May 1985. Vickers had been paid to set the fires by the restaurant's owner in an insurance scam. On August 30th, 1989, 36-year-old Jerry Lee Ronson was found shot to death in his home in Paris, Texas. It's believed that James Monroe Kent III was hired to be a hitman by Ronson's 38-year-old wife, Patricia Ronson Steinbeck. Vickers was somehow involved in the conspiracy to commit murder, but his involvement was never clearly explained. What is known is that he was friends with James Kent, the alleged shooter. When Vickers was arrested in October 1988 for possession of marijuana, Kent was one of the men who was arrested with him. Vickers ended up working with the Texas Rangers so he wouldn't face any charges regarding the murder. Also, he would face reduced charges regarding the arsons. Vickers wore a wire and recorded Steinbeck and Kent talking about the murder. In December 1990, 15 months after the murder, Steinbeck and Kent were both arrested. In the spring of 1991, they both pleaded guilty and they were both sentenced to life in prison. For the arson fires, Vickers was sentenced to 5 years in prison. It's unclear how long he served, but he was out of prison by March 1993. After Billy Frank Vickers was found hobbling close to where Philip Kinslow was shot, he was brought to the hospital. It turned out that he had been shot 3 times, once in the right knee and 2 times in the right thigh. Vickers was questioned about the murder of Philip Kinslow. Vickers confessed, and he said that 2 other men were involved, 51-year-old Tommy Perkins and 34-year-old Jason Martin. The 2 men were quickly arrested. Jason Martin also confessed. Using both men's confessions, the police were able to piece together what they believed happened. The men knew at the end of the day, Kinslow took the money and food stamps he earned at the store home with him. So they followed him for several days and learned his routine. On March 12th, Martin was driving and he dropped off Vickers and Perkins, who were waiting for Kinslow to get home. They were both wearing ski masks. Martin said that Perkins had a .38 caliber pistol and Vickers had a .22 caliber rifle. When Kinslow got out of the car, they demanded the money. When Kinslow pulled the bag of money out, he also pulled out a gun. They fired several shots at Kinslow, and he returned fire. Kinslow was hit twice in the right arm and once in the chest. Kinslow then got into his car. The men never got the money, which was over $10,000. Martin said that when he heard the gunshots, he took off in the car, leaving Vickers and Perkins behind. He later learned that Kinslow had been shot to death. The morning after the shooting, he said that Perkins woke him up. They went looking for Vickers. Martin told Perkins that Kinslow had died, but Perkins didn't believe him. He said they saw Kinslow drive away. They drove to Kinslow's store and they saw a wreath on the door. Perkins then realized that Kinslow was dead. Perkins thought that Vickers was probably dead as well because he had a bad heart. When Perkins was arrested, .22 caliber rifle bullets were found in his glove compartment. They were the same bullets that killed Kinslow. A slug was pulled from Vickers' knee. It was determined that the bullet was fired from Kinslow's gun. Also, the strands of hair found in the ski mask at the crime scene matched Vickers' hair. Tommy Perkins went to trial first in July 1993. Jason Martin agreed to testify against both of his accomplices. Perkins was convicted and he was sentenced to life in prison. Billy Frank Vickers went to trial months later in October 1993. The trial lasted about a week. There was a lot of physical evidence against him, including the bullet that was pulled from his knee and the hair in the ski mask. The jury only spent 40 minutes deliberating. He was found guilty. He was then sentenced to death. Just over 10 years later, on December 9, 2003, Vickers was scheduled to be executed. But he was given a last-minute reprieve. He was then scheduled to die on January 28, 2004. Although there was a substantial amount of evidence that Vickers killed Philip Kinslow, including his own confession, Vickers had spent the last decade claiming he was innocent. While Vickers was strapped to the gurney, he made some shocking confessions. He admitted he killed Philip Kinslow. He then said, "There were several more that I had done or had part of. I'm sorry, I'm not sure how many. There must be a dozen or 14, I believe, all total." He mentioned that there was an inmate serving a sentence for murder in Lamar County, Texas. Vickers didn't give the man's name, but he said that he was innocent. He said that the man's father committed the murder and he was there when it happened. Vickers only specifically named one person in his deathbed confession besides Philip Kinslow. He said, "One I would like to clear up is Cullen Davis, where he was charged with shooting his wife. He didn't do that." In August 1972, Cullen Davis was going through a bitter divorce with his second wife, Priscilla. Cullen is an oil man from a prominent family. It was estimated that he was worth $100 million. On August 2, 1976, Priscilla's 12-year-old daughter, Andrea, was shot execution-style in the family's mansion on the outskirts of Fort Worth, Texas. Priscilla wasn't home at the time of the murder, but when she came home, she encountered the gunman. She screamed, and her new boyfriend, 31-year-old Stan Farr, who was in the master bedroom, ran towards her. The gunman shot Priscilla and Farr. Farr, who was a former college basketball star, died from his wounds. Priscilla survived, and she said that the shooter was her 42-year-old estranged husband. Cullen Davis was arrested later that night. He went to trial in August 1977. His plea that he was the richest man ever to go to trial for murder in America. He was ultimately acquitted. In August 1978, Cullen Davis was arrested again. This time it was for trying to hire a hitman to kill Priscilla and the judge presiding over their divorce. The FBI learned that Cullen was looking for a hitman, so they set up a sting. They recorded him on audio and video talking to an agent posing as a hitman. The agent also accepted $25,000 from Cullen, and he gave Cullen a gun with a silencer. He was arrested shortly after the exchange of the money and the gun. In November 1979, Cullen was again acquitted of all charges. Both of Cullen's trials were big news in Texas and around the country. Vickers then said, "And all these were nothing personal, it was just something I did to make a living. I wish to say to my family, I'm sorry for all the grief I put you through. I love you all, that's all I have to say." 6 months later, 58-year-old Billy Frank Vickers was pronounced dead. The district attorney was asked if he believed that Vickers committed other murders. He said he wouldn't put much stock into Vickers' deathbed confessions. He thinks it was just Vickers' way of screwing with the system one last time before he died. It's been 17 years since Billy Frank Vickers was executed. During that time, he has not been connected to any other murders. Number 2. Jason Massey. On the evening of July 27, 1993, 14-year-old Brian King was sleeping on a hammock on his family's property in Ellis County, Texas. His father noticed a tan vehicle pull up and honk its horn. Brian walked up to the car and had a discussion with the driver, and then he got in. Sadly, Brian didn't return home that night. The next day, Brian's family noticed that his 13-year-old stepsister, Christina Benjamin, was also missing. On July 30th, 1993, 3 days after they went missing, a road crew was working in a remote area in Tellico, Texas, just a few miles from Brian and Christina's home. They came across the new dead body of an adolescent girl. Her head and her hands were missing. The medical examiner would later determine she had been stabbed and shot. Her body had been mutilated, probably after death. Her nipples had been removed. She had several cuts on her thighs, genitals, and abdomen. She had also been disemboweled. It did not appear that she had been sexually assaulted. About 100 yards from her body, the body of a teenage boy was found. He was fully clothed. The medical examiner determined that the boy had been shot twice in the head with a .22 caliber gun, which was the cause of death. The girl's head and hands were never found, so the medical examiner couldn't definitively determine the cause of death. The boy was quickly identified as 14-year-old Brian King. His wallet was in his back pocket with his library card in it. Brian's father confirmed it was his son's wallet. Since Christina was missing, the family thought that the adolescent girl was probably her. After some investigating, the authorities concluded it was the body of 13-year-old Christina Benjamin. One piece of evidence that was found on Brian's pants was a strand of blonde hair that did not belong to either victim. Also, carpet fiber was found on one of Brian's shoes. The fiber was tan, and it most likely came from a Japanese car. The police talked to Brian and Christina's neighbors. They said that on the night they disappeared, they planned to meet up with a friend named Jason. The police also received an anonymous tip that they should investigate a 20-year-old man named Jason Massey. The police were aware of Jason Massey because he had been arrested several times for stalking, harassment, and theft. He also had a history of violence towards animals. This caught the attention of the investigators. They had talked to a criminal profiler with the FBI, and the profiler said that the killer most likely started off by hurting animals. Massey's friends told the investigators that he would sever the heads of small animals and they would save them as trophies in an old cooler they kept hidden in the woods. A few days before the bodies were found, the police were called to a McDonald's in Enos, Texas. A calf had been found mutilated behind the restaurant. When the police arrived, they noticed a tan car driving away. Near the calf's body, they found a bracelet with the name Jason on it. The police talked to some of Massey's friends, and they said he mutilated the calf. Massey also told a friend that he wanted to become a serial killer. He showed another friend places he could hide bodies. It turned out that Massey was casual acquaintances with Brian and Christina. Jason Massey quickly shot to the top of the suspect list. The police searched his car, which was a tan Subaru. On the seats, they found 3 bloodstains. They also found other items with bloodstains on them. This included a leaf, a roll of duct tape, and a hammer. They also found handcuffs and a hunting knife. What the police were hoping to find was a .22 caliber gun. They didn't find it, but they did find a receipt that indicated that someone had recently purchased some .22 caliber ammunition. The ammunition was purchased at the same time as the handcuffs and the hunting knife. The police went to the store where the purchases were made and showed the cashier a photo lineup. The cashier identified Massey as the person who purchased the ammunition. The police took a sample of the carpet in Massey's car. They also collected a sample of Massey's hair. Not long after Massey's car was searched, the police received another anonymous tip. The caller said that they saw Massey cleaning the inside and outside of his car at a local car wash. The police got a warrant and collected the contents of the vacuum's tank. Inside the tank, they found a business card that belonged to Massey's probation officer. They also found some strands of long blonde hair. It turned out they were Christina Benjamin's hairs. DNA testing was done on the blood found in the car. It was determined that was Christina's blood. Also, it was Massey's hair that was found on Brian's pants. Finally, the carbon fibers in Massey's car matched the fiber found on Brian's shoe. On August 3, 1993, 20-year-old Jason Massey was arrested for the murders of Brian King and Christina Benjamin. He went to trial in September 1994. The trial lasted about a month. The prosecution explained what they thought happened that night. Brian and Christina were in Massey's car. Massey shot Brian twice in the head. Then Christina ran and Massey chased after her. He shot her once in the back and then again in the head. He then stabbed her. When she was dead, he set to work mutilating her. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Jason Massey was ultimately found guilty. It turned out that a hunter had found a cooler in the woods. In the cooler were the skulls of 31 small animals and 2 journals written by Jason Massey. Passages from the journal were read aloud at his sentencing hearing. He wrote, "I am going to embark on a sacred journey. Yes, I'm going to start my campaign as a serial killer." In another entry, he wrote, "All I want is the murdering of countless young women. I wish to reap sorrow for the families." He also wrote about his obsessions with Ted Bundy and Charles Manson. The jury deliberated for 15 minutes. Then they sentenced 21-year-old Jason Massey to death. On April 3, 2001, less than 7 years after Massey was condemned to death, he was brought into the gas chamber. He addressed the family of his victims. He said, "I can't imagine what I've taken from you. I want you to know I did do it. I'm sorry for what I have done. I want you to know that Christina did not suffer as much as you think she did." He then addressed the fact that Christina's head and hands were never found. He said, "I know you guys want to know where the rest of her remains are. I put her remains in the Trinity River." The Trinity River is a short distance from where the bodies were found. Massey then apologized to his family. He also said that God had changed his life and that Jesus was the Lord. Finally he said, "Tonight I dance on the streets of gold. Let those without sin cast the first stone." 28-year-old Jason Massey was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. Even though Massey confessed what he did with Christina's body parts, they have never been found. Number 1. Luis Salazar. On October 11, 1997, 28-year-old Martha Sanchez was sleeping in her home in San Antonio, Texas. Her 2-year-old daughter was sleeping in the same bed as her. In a crib in the same room was her 6-month-old son. Her 10-year-old son, Eric, was sleeping in his own room. Martha's husband was working an overnight shift. While the family slept, a man entered through an unlocked window. He made his way to the master bedroom and attempted to sexually assault Martha. She started screaming. Then the man stabbed her multiple times in the chest. The screams woke up 10-year-old Eric. He rushed to his mother's bedroom. He tried to wrestle the knife away from the attacker, and he was stabbed in the chest. His mother told him to run and get help. Bleeding from the chest, Eric got out of the house and started pounding on the doors of his neighbors' homes. Finally, one of them opened the door. They rushed to Eric's house. The neighbor saw a man riding away on a bicycle. Sadly, Martha was dead in bed. Beside her, the 2-year-old was covered in blood. It turned out that it was her mother's blood, and she was unharmed. 10-year-old Eric was rushed to the hospital. He survived his wound. Eric told the police that the attacker was their former neighbor, 27-year-old Luis Salazar. Salazar had a violent criminal record. 8 years earlier, he was convicted of 4 counts of aggravated robbery for holding up convenience stores. He was given probation. 4 years later, he pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault. He had sexually assaulted an 18-year-old woman with mental disabilities. He was given 2 years of probation. Salazar knew Martha and her family. They had been neighbors for 3 years. Martha's husband helped get Salazar a job at Kmart. Salazar also made inappropriate passes at Martha. For example, one night he came over to her home and asked to borrow some sugar, and then said, "But not that kind of sugar." After that incident, Martha's husband ordered Salazar to stay away from his family. The house next door to Martha's, where Salazar lived, belonged to Salazar's mother-in-law. He moved out in September 1997, just a few weeks before the murder. The police looked around the crime scene. They discovered that the phone line outside the house had been cut. A few hours after the attack, Luis Salazar turned himself in. Salazar went to trial a year later, in October 1998. Eric testified against Salazar, and he showed his scars to the jury. Salazar testified on his own behalf. He said that on the night of the murder, he had been drinking and doing drugs at a friend's home. He decided to go to his mother-in-law's home, where he occasionally crashed. But in his haze, he mixed up Martha's home with his mother-in-law's home. He didn't have a key to his mother-in-law's home, so he climbed in through a window. He thought that Martha was an intruder, so he picked up a knife and he attacked her. He felt someone grab his arm, so he stabbed that person as well. When Martha yelled, "Run, Eric," he realized that he was in the wrong house, so he fled. Salazar said he didn't cut the phone line. He admitted that he had been sexually attracted to Martha, but he didn't try to rape her. The jury didn't believe Salazar's story. He was found guilty, and he was sentenced to death. 10.5 years later, on March 11, 2009, Luis Salazar was scheduled to die. About an hour before his execution, Salazar was talking with one of his spiritual counselors. He confessed to several crimes. This included a murder he committed in 1992, about 4.5 years before Martha Sanchez was killed. On Easter weekend, he had stabbed a female clerk to death during a convenience store robbery in San Antonio. He didn't know the victim's name, but he gave some details about the robbery and the murder. The spiritual counselor recorded the confession. Shortly after confessing to the murder, Salazar was strapped to the gurney in the death chamber. He was pronounced dead at 6:20 p.m. Luis Salazar was 38 years old. After he was executed, the spiritual counselor gave the tape to the San Antonio Police Department. They looked through the records, and they found a cold case that matched the details of the confession. On April 19, 1992, which was Easter Sunday, 18-year-old Melissa Morales was working alone in a convenience store in San Antonio. She was found dead in the store. She had been stabbed 13 times. The murder was long considered cold, and the police didn't have any suspects. There were details in Salazar's confession that only the killer would have known. After investigating the confession, the police are sure Salazar was telling the truth and he killed Morales. Salazar had never been considered a suspect, and had he not confessed, he probably would have never been linked to the crime. After 17 years, the police consider Melissa Morales' murder case closed. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. Don't forget to check out the latest episode of Into the Killing. You can find it on Deezer, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you find your favorite podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.